Hi, I'm Claire Atherton and this is episode 23 of Beating BTD with my guest, the irrepressible Berni Benton. Berni hid what she called her secret shame for 40 years before discovering completely by chance that she'd been suffering from skin picking disorder, a common comorbidity with BTD that can also manifest on its own. She's since made a lot of progress in understanding the disorder and saying no to the skin picking voice, and she's even appeared in a naked calendar. Here's her story. Hi Berni, thank you so much for joining us on Beating BTD. It's lovely to have you.
Thanks, Claire. I'm honoured to have been asked.
You talked on your website about having gone from seeing your skin picking disorder as a secret shame to now writing about it really publicly alongside a naked picture of yourself for a calendar called the Naked Truth Calendar. So it's quite a transformation.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff that has happened probably wouldn't have happened had we not had the COVID pandemic. And I know that sounds weird because I know that so many people have struggled with the pandemic, and I have had struggles during the pandemic, but I have also found that it has given me the time and the space to reassess myself, reinvent myself, have that quiet time in my head where I have been able to properly allow myself to have time for me to look into things. Whereas, like most people, or people who are empathetic or caring or whatever, or emotional, I guess, we are always forgiving and giving time and giving ourselves to other people, but we always feel guilty. We run out of time for ourselves. But because all my business closed down for a good year, I had a lot of time on my hands, but I wasn't afraid of it because I have space. So I was able to really make some positive use of it. So whilst I'm not happy that we've had a pandemic, I have come out of it quite well, I think.
And also that's interesting that you say that, because it's shown that you obviously have real mental resilience.
I struggled at the beginning because I didn't have see, I'm really great at, I go and hug everybody and I solve other people's problems, and when, and I didn't know how to do that. So I started off thinking, I'm going to do everything. I'll help by setting up Zoom coffee mornings and touch base. And I did that for a little while and then found it a bit overwhelming. And then I ended up doing things like community shopping and things like that, which meant that I actually went out and interacted with people, which made me feel a bit less isolated. But I did it in that controlled way because I was doing it on behalf of other people. It was really good for me because I always do better if I'm doing it for somebody else. Perhaps that's because I don't think I'm worth doing it for, but if I can do it for somebody else, I don't know. I've tried to work out why that is, but yeah.
Yeah, who knows? Because it could also just be that it does make us feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we all like helping, don't we? We like being helpful, we like being needed, and we do like it. But at the same time, we really struggle to ask for help ourselves and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable with other people. So we hold on to our shame and our lack of ability, as we see it, as a failing of ourselves. So I'll be like really able and be helping lots of people, then I'll have a crash and I won't, but I will feel guilty that I am not that, like, I know, Wonder Woman that I think that everybody thinks I am. Which is ridiculous, and then you have that guilt. But I think, I have recently done a lot of reading of Brené Brown, who is one of my heroes. She said something really interesting, which was, if you happily help people, but you never ask for help, you are perceiving yourself as better than the people whose help you give, because you don't mind helping people, but you think it's below you to ask for help. So you're basically putting yourself on a pedestal of being better for them. And you should really give other people the pleasure of helping you as well. It helps you to be more authentic. And you are more authentic because if you say, okay, I can do everything now, I'm feeling strong now, let me help you. But now I'm feeling a bit, out of my depth. Would you mind helping me? And they'll go, yes, thank goodness, because I'm repaying some of that. It's much more of a balanced relationship rather than I'm the giver and you're the taker.
Fantastic. I'm going to just come back to the calendar because I'm really interested in it. So you said that it raised £1,000 for the BDD Foundation, which is fantastic. But what did it do for you? What impact did it make on you to take part?
We raised just over £1,000, which was really exciting, but it kind of all happened by accident. And again, it happened because of the pandemic. Because what happened was, on the 1st of May, it's International Naked Gardening Day, and I was faffing around on social media as I do, and then this picture appeared, and it was one of those Hilda images, that sort of like the kind of real looking woman. It was always like got ginger hair, always jolly, and she's always doing everyday things, but in her underwear or naked or whatever. And there was an image of her dancing around with a flower garland in front of her, and it said International World Naked Gardening Day, and I thought, right, I'm going to go out and take a picture. I'm going to recreate that picture. I have no idea why. And I said to my husband, right, you need to take a picture of me. I'm going to recreate this picture. So I started leaping around the garden and falling into the lawn because you had to stand on one leg and falling into the garden. And a friend went, oh, my goodness, I didn't know it was World Naked Gardening Day. I'm going to go and take a picture. So she took a picture and put it onto social media. And she said, you should do a calendar. And I went, well, for a start, there is no way I would take another picture, really. And secondly, nobody wants 12 pictures of me in naked or otherwise, if they don't, except maybe my husband, but perhaps, I don't know, but I've never asked him. But, and then when I thought, I wonder if anyone else fancies doing this, because, I had written a few blogs about body positivity and what's to blame within society, and how angry it makes me that women are pumping themselves through it full of this and that, and being upset because they've gained weight, or we've got older and everything's a bit saggier, and all of those things, and we haven't even got on to the issues with my skin picking yet. But I'd written all that, so I said I put a shout out, and I had quite a good response, and in the end we had 24 people, including myself. 6 were men and 18 were women, and they ranged from 75 years old to 23. And they were all stuck in their houses on their own. Some of them had to set up cameras and do them as selfies. Some of them had their partners taking pictures for them. And what I wanted to do was gather all the pictures together and put with them the person's story. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit, but I had just over the last 2 years started using the words skin picking, which I find is really embarrassing, and dermatillomania, which I find a little less embarrassing just because it's medical sounding, and I can't help it. I've got this illness type thing, but I'd kind of just started saying those things out loud and admitting them to people. So I took my picture and I wrote my piece with that, and other people did, and they'd written about how they'd survived cancer, or how they'd, whatever it was. And some people didn't say very much, and some people felt empowered and strong as a result of doing the picture and seeing how the fundraising was going. And others said to me, when looking back, if it hadn't been a lockdown and I hadn't thought we were all going to die, I'd have never done that. So we put it together. We had a vote because I really wanted it to be a body positivity and a body focused thing. And it was about not how we looked, but how we felt, and the journey we'd been on, and how we felt despite how we look and what we've been, how we can feel. Because I don't always feel like that. The most days I wouldn't even dream of being naked, contrary to popular belief, because I had a phone call from someone about a year after we'd done the calendar, and he said, oh, you like gardening naked? I come from the village where the original naked gardener was. Why don't you come down? We have clothes optional days. And I said to him, that's very kind, but genuinely speaking, I do not even go outside. I live in Wales. I don't often go outside with very few clothes on, never mind naked. No, it's not practical. But I don't feel that way about my body and generally. But it was really nice to do, and it made me feel really kind of obviously humongously proud of myself, but humongously proud of everybody who was involved and in awe of the people who, and there's the stories that they shared and the stories they told me about their secret shames or their frightening journeys, or whatever, And I thought, we've all got our hang ups and I know body dysmorphia, and I'm not belittling it or minimizing the reality of it in any way, but to some degree, everybody perceives themselves differently from how everyone else perceives them. Like, we obsess about not liking our nose, or think we're too fat, or think that everyone's going to look at us wearing something with these bulges. And we kind of have everyone kind of has this view of themselves that is not as gracious as other people's view of you. It's because society tells us we have to be in certain ways. And everyone felt so good for doing it, and it was wrinkles and everything. And when we raised that much money, and because I was more interested really in raising awareness of BDD Foundation, because I didn't find the BDD Foundation for nearly 40 years. I'd not heard of body dysmorphic disorder. I'd not heard of dermatillomania. I didn't know that skin picking was anything other than, stop picking that scab, you'll make it worse type thing. It was just something. For me, it was this secret shame, this thing I did embarrassingly, and it was a form of self-harm that I never told anybody I did. So I'd spent my entire life, as far as I can remember, harming myself and pretending that I had an illness. That's how it felt, and worrying my parents, who took me from one dermatologist to another dermatologist to a specialist in London, to this, to that, to the other, and them trying every medical solution they could and trying to come up with a name for what I had. And I think doing that made it worse, because I knew that I was causing this pain and heartache and worry to my parents, and I was a fake. I was this fraud because I didn't have a skin problem. I had, as it turns out, a mental health problem that exhibited itself through a repetitive behavioural process. But I didn't know any of that. I just thought I was some freak.
That's often the way that people with all of these conditions, I think, that people just think it's them and their problem, and they don't realise that they're actually suffering from something treatable and medical. And
we do, and it's been a slow process of self-awareness, because I started writing a blog called Rose Tinted Ramblings, and I called it Rose Tinted Ramblings of an Ordinarily Extraordinary Life. What I wanted to do was to try and write as candidly and openly and authentically as I could at the times I was. So if I was raging because I had PMT, I would write about the rage of PMT. If I was skipping around in the garden because it was spring, and I would write about that. But I wanted people to realise that we all are extraordinary, and it's ordinary to be extraordinary, so we all feel weird or different or uncomfortable or worry about things and think that that's not what everyone else has got it all together, and they haven't. And people come to me and they go, "You've got it all together, Bernie, and you're so confident, and you're so this or you're so that." And then, because I know that that's not how I feel inside, I spent a lot of time feeling guilty and feeling a fraud for that as well. So by writing this blog, which I don't know if anyone reads it or anyone looks at it, but by writing authentically, and I never know what I'm going to write. When I sometimes I think I've got to write something, and I'll go and I'll start writing, and what ends up on the page is something completely different from what I went to write. And it just sort of it's kind of like a private diary in public, I guess. I try to say, this is how I'm feeling, and I feel weird feeling it, but I genuinely believe that I'm not alone feeling this. And by sharing it, perhaps you will realise that you're not so weird either. We're just all different.
Absolutely. So you're actually the first person that we've talked to on the podcast about skin picking disorder. Let me see if I can say dermatillomania. Dermatillomania?
Well, I think it's dermatillomania, but I mean, I don't know.
I'm going to absolutely take your word for that. What's the experience like so people who don't have this can understand? What's it like in your body to feel this compulsion to pick?
There's this voice in my head, and it's almost like it's really insidious, and it sort of like whispers at me, go on, go on, go on, go on, you know you want to, you're going to do it anyway, there's no point in delaying doing this. And in my mind constantly, whatever I'm doing, whatever conversation I'm having, whatever TV I'm watching, wherever I am, sat in a cafe, my mind's eye is constantly scanning my entire body for tiny little sensations and feelings like lumps or tiny little irritations. And then and I'm desperate for my fingers to go and find them and then flatten them out. And quite often, certainly when I was younger, I would spend a lot of time trying to work out how I could get into the bathroom so that I could spend as long as I needed smoothing out or picking out blackheads and little, I don't know, goosebumps or whatever it was, and they would bleed, and I would dab them, and I would, and you would get this kind of sense of relief as you are doing it, and then this massive sense of guilt and shame that you've done it. And even like when you're sat in a public place and you think, and you've got your hand hidden down the top of your jumper and you're gently scratching away thinking, I wonder if anyone can notice that I'm doing this, but I can't help myself. It's got to happen now. It's an exhausting sensation because it's there happening all the time.
And it's really compulsive by the sounds of it.
It's really compulsive. It's just all the time. And you realise now, especially this last year and a half, since we've all started doing Zoom and all these online things, in the past, I probably, I quite often will get up. I realise halfway through the day, I haven't looked to see if I've taken yesterday's makeup off or looked at my hair. I have no idea what's going on. I haven't looked in a mirror, but you spend a lot of time now, not only looking in a mirror, but worse because you're kind of looking in a kind of reverse mirror, so it's like you don't look like yourself, so you look odd anyway. You know how your camera, sometimes if you've got your camera set to one thing, everything writing's back to front, so that's not how things are. So if you have it so it turns round, so that's how people see you rather than how you see yourself. It's a really disturbing and distorted view of yourself, and it's really hard to look at yourself all that time, so have it as small as I can. But I noticed how much, and I know I'm doing it now, how little time I spend with my hands just still, rested on my knees or rested. They are constantly fiddling with my skin, even if it's just, this really super sensitive sensation in my fingertips. And I find it really soothing, gently touching things with my fingertips. And I think then I've been trying to use that as a kind of like a fidget toy. So instead of touching on my other skin, I'll just gently touch my fingertips together because the sensation's really nice. But I do find myself, and it's really obvious when you're doing video chat, I see myself constantly fiddling with my skin, but touching here, there, and everywhere, and it's embarrassing. And and the more I think I mustn't do it, the more I feel compelled to do it. Like it's like bits of my body are shouting at me to, come on, you can just fiddle with your ankle while you're chatting. No one will see.
But also, it's like you developed a hypersensitivity by the sounds of it in your fingertips.
That's a really good description, actually. And I was talking to my psychotherapist, who I've recently engaged with again after years of not. I just felt I was ready to try and somehow come. We're trying to get some peace and balance between this voice that controls my skin picking and the other voices and other hats. I think I've got to this thing where when I was probably around 13, which is when this probably started. And I'm 53 now, so that's 40 years, and only maybe 2 or 3 of them where I've even begun to acknowledge it out loud as a thing that is real and that needs addressing more openly. So 40 years of harming myself and feeling guilt and shame and embarrassment and wasting NHS time on the wrong departments, all the things that I was doing and pretending to be one thing when I'm something else, and there's this whole guilt thing. I think what I'm trying to do now is balance that voice. My therapist says that when you start a habit, it is a self-preservation thing. So it happens to protect you from something that's worse than what you're doing. So it starts off as being something that's healthy, like, and then it becomes an obsession and control. And then you're doing it, even though the issue that started it has long gone. But that coping bit of your personality is still controlling everything, because that was the mechanism that helped and soothed and gave you comfort at some distant point in my past. And that makes sense. And then I think, but because that voice has got so loud, and as I've got older, I've reinvented myself lots of times and done lots of things and become lots of different people and developed lots of skills. And I have lots of different tools in my armory now that I could use instead of skin picking. But my skin picking self is the one that has the loudest voice. And what I'm trying to do, with the help of my therapist and the tools that she's given me, is try and kind of, in a non-threatening way, thank it for the solution it offered me when I was 13, and say, I'm not trying to get rid of you, but you need to be a more equal partner with all these other Bernies that are in me. There's loads of different, there's Bernie the artist, Bernie the celebrant, Bernie the mad, whatever, there's like hundreds of different Bernies and lots of different skills that I have, and I can sometimes choose to draw on them. And yes, there might be occasions where my skin picking voice, whatever he is has the right to have a say, but he can't control everything all the time. It needs to be much more, we're a collective, we're not a totalitarian state. This body is made up of lots of ideas and tools and skills, and that one can't have me all of the time.
That's really interesting, and I think that is something that would resonate with anyone with BDD as well, because the BDD voice is such a strong force. And it's about recognizing that you don't always have to listen to it, or you don't have to listen to it at all. You can accept it's there, but it doesn't mean it has to dictate how you live your life.
And if sometimes you slip, that's the one thing. That it's easy for me to think I've got it under control when I'm in a good place and it's not very bad. Sometimes in a bad place and it is bad, and can I sometimes say no to that voice when my skin is bad and I'm in a not in such a positive situation in my life, and I must be not grateful. I must what I'm trying to do is acknowledge those moments when I have delayed the demands of that voice that tells me I've got to pick. Might eventually do it, but if I can delay it, then I'm going, yeah, good for you. You haven't, you Mr. Nasty little insidious skin picking voice. Okay, I'll do it in my own time. Thank you very much. I'm not going to do it now, but I might still end up going back and picking that bit of my skin that I didn't, and it might only be 10 minutes later, but I didn't do it when it demanded that I did it, so that's a win for me. And I think, according to Linda, if you do that enough, eventually, I'll have to take her word for it at the moment, but eventually it will be that voice will be less controlling.
So you mentioned that your skin picking started when you were around 13. What do you think triggered it?
Yeah, been trying to get to the bottom of this in my head for a really long time. I think when I was a teenager, I had a lot of eczema anyway. So I had, that horrible, kids eczema that you get behind your knees and on in your elbows and things. And then of course I hit teenage and I also had, teenage acne as well. And I had as a child we moved around a lot. With my dad's work, so I'd start new schools in the middle of terms, in the middle of years, and I would, struggle to settle and be bullied. And I think my mum has dermatitis, and I remember my mum used to, she'd always be like, she'd pick the top off her, like a goosebump or a blackhead or something. She would have her hanky and she would dab it, and there'd be little spots of blood on her hanky. And I can't remember whether I found that horrible or whether I found it fascinating or a bit of both. But I wonder if that is what focused me on it. But being different in school, whether it's a bad different or a good different, as a child, being different is generally, unless you have some amazingly, strong personality somehow, it's usually an embarrassment to you or difficult. And and if you end up in that cycle of being bullied and being self-conscious and being, I was very clever, so academically, but I was always really shit at sport, and so, in sport, even in England, and not America, if you're not good at sport and you have all that embarrassment of being the last person that was being picked for a team and everything. So there's a lot of guilt and embarrassment. I was the only child who wore glasses, so I always felt like I'd stuck out. And I think the skin picking probably started as a kind of numbs your mind. It's like trance-like. You kind of go into this zone of, I don't know if it's about control, because somehow you feel like you're in control when actually not in control at all, because you can't stop yourself. But instead of somebody outside of you hurting you, you're hurting yourself. And somehow that's kind of, you can't hurt me because I hurt myself more. So what you do is nothing, because look what I can do myself.
Yeah. As you got older and sort of entered adulthood, to what extent did you try and hide that you had this and that you were? I mean, did you try and hide it? For example, when you met your husband?
I don't remember huge chunks of things. Because I remember feeling, on the one hand, that I had periods of great confidence and going out, and I don't remember. I remember the phases where I would like avoid, wearing bikinis was a no-no, wearing swimsuits, worrying about it being summer because I would need to couldn't wear tights or couldn't wear long sleeves because, I get really hot. I'm really bad at regulating my core temperature, but and those times where you just don't go somewhere because there isn't enough makeup. I mean, at 13, I remember my mum, I assume my parents were trying to help. And they discovered this stuff, and it was called Veil. And it was a really thick foundation that was available in, 13 different colours. So you got the nearest colour to your skin tone, and you'd plaster it on and kid yourself that you couldn't see anything. But of course, when you cover blemishes and oozing spots or whatever with a thick cream, not only does it make your skin worse because they don't breathe, but it also, and it clogs them. You also then pick and they scab on top. And it's just, and I remember feeling, because at that age, 40 years ago, 13-year-olds didn't wear makeup to school, or you were still a kid then and you just didn't. And I know that young people perhaps do now. It didn't. So I felt different just from wearing makeup. And then I felt different again because one of the treatments to try and help was to have sunbeds. I mean, what I'd give for someone to give me free sunbed treatments now. But as a child, I didn't want to be the only person in school with a tan in the middle of winter because I'd been on a sunbed treatment, because, it was like, didn't want it. So until I moved to Wales 15 years ago, I didn't leave the house without full makeup on. Even when the problem wasn't necessarily on my face at the time, the history of the problem was always on my face and is on my face. But, at the moment, it's mostly on my legs. It used to be on my back and my shoulders. My arms are just, interspersed with little white and brown scars, little circles all over my hands, my arms, my interspersed with freckles, which for years and years I used to, and probably this is what I probably did with my partner, is I am and I do overreact to insect bites, but I blamed this overreaction to insect bites on everything. So kind of, and then you kind of, for somehow having a thing that was bleeding or looking horrible and sore, if it was caused by an insect rather than being caused by myself, was less embarrassing, except for the fact that it would have been if I wasn't so guilty about knowing that I was lying about it, So it's kind of like this like forever circle where you kind of, you think you're solving your problem, you're only kidding yourself, and you're not really kidding yourself. You're just embarrassing yourself by not being honest with yourself. So I write a blog about authenticity where I try and be as authentic as I like, and I am still hiding this massive big secret that I've kept for 40 years. So it's kind of like messes a lot with your mental well-being. We don't talk gently to ourselves, do we? We always, if my friend came to me and went, "Oh, I'm so fat," or "Oh, my skin is so awful," and I'd go, "I haven't noticed," or "No, you're not," or I'd say something nice, or I'd point out something positive, but we berate and we vocalize intolerance to ourselves that we would never ever bestow on anybody that we know and love, and we perceive ourselves and our faults in a way that the same thing in others we don't perceive in such a negative way. We're really unkind to ourselves as I think all of us are guilty of that to some degree, but we, and it's not just, I don't believe it's just me because I talk about it a lot now, but I used to think, I deserve this. Once you recognize you're doing it, you can try and talk more kindly to yourself. I mean, nowadays, at the end of every day, I try and say, yeah, I've done, I'll write a list of the things I need to do in a day, and I'll break each of the things down into 20 things. So I'll write 20 things on the list. So I won't put clean the bathroom. I'll write, I'll break it into 20 things. So I've got things to cross off. But I'll also, if I do something that wasn't on the list, I will write it on the list, then cross it off. So I've got, at the end of the day, I've got this visual representation of the things I have achieved in that day, rather than focusing on the ones that I haven't. I've still got lots of things that I've achieved in a day. Like we twist our negative thoughts, we can trick our brain into having a more positive view of itself as well. My therapist actually said, I've just noticed in my notes, because I write everything down, the mind naturally prefers anxiety to peace because it's a way of keeping us alert and on guard. So I guess as cave people, that was the best place to be. And now it's not often relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. So you discovered quite by chance that you had a kind of a psychological condition, didn't you? Can you tell me about how that happened?
Initially, I think I'd kind of sneakily had a look online for it a few times, and all I'd ever found was stuff in America, and it didn't really make any sense. And, I thought maybe it is, and then I would tentatively go to a doctor and say, I think I've got this, and they'd kind of ignore you and what have you. So I kept putting that to one side, and then my old company that I used to work for had a reunion. And at the reunion, Nicole, who's very important in the BDD Foundation, she happens to be the daughter of the partner of the managing director of the company. And she came along to this event, and she was reading her children's book, but she was handing out her book on BDD, body dysmorphic disorder. And I got a copy and I read it, and I was thinking, oh my God, this is kind of, and then I got to the bit with Liz Atkins, and I cried because she is, for anyone who doesn't know, she's a charcoal artist now. She has helped her dermatillomania by using, she probably obviously has artistic tendencies anyway, but she sits and she charcoal draws, and then her hands are covered in charcoal, so she doesn't touch her skin. And she was talking about this thing and gave it a name. And I just sat and I cried and I messaged Nicole and I said about it. And then she told me to go to look at the BDD conference, not last year's, the one before the lockdown. And Liz Atkins was the keynote speaker. And I listened to her description of the guilt and her story. And I contacted her and I said, you're telling my story. I thought I was one person who was shamefully spending years at dermatologist when I knew I didn't have a dermatological background. I just thought I was a nutter, and you have basically spoken as if the words had come out of my mouth, and it was like a weight being lifted from me. And at this point, I still kind of I certainly hadn't mentioned it to my parents, who had spent decades taking me to, and I'd been diagnosed with something that I didn't have because, after 6 years, the doctors were desperate to give a name to the problem. So they told me I had something else. They actually decided that I'd had something called Behçet syndrome, which is a life-limiting illness. And I knew all along I didn't have it because I knew that the skin part of my illness wasn't real. But my parents grabbed hold of this diagnosis and embraced it because they'd finally got a name for what was my problem. And they went and joined the society and listened. And I just kind of refused to engage with any of that. And I knew that wasn't my problem, but I just kind of ignored it. And then I didn't really address it properly again until last year, because I went to try and get HRT because I'm a lady of a certain age. So I went to the doctor to talk about, my menstrual cycles and how I felt that because as well as just going back one point, my skin picking as some sort of cycle. I mean, it's there all the time, but it had, the obsession and the mental focus is there all the time. But the extent to which my skin is damaged and inflamed and angry is very much related to a 3-monthly cycle and a monthly cycle. And so I went to see the doctor and said, I think, everything's getting worse. I'm sure I'm perimenopausal. Can we talk about HRT? And she went, no, you've got Behçet's, you can't have HRT. And I said, I haven't. I've got something called dermatillomania. And I printed it off and I passed it to her. And I said, and she didn't laugh at me and she didn't tell me I was wrong about it. She went and looked at it. And then I said to her, look, I'm happy to go and see a dermatologist, but I want to see a dermatologist alongside seeing a psychotherapist because this is a mental health issue.
Yeah. What would you say of all of the things that you've learned and put into practice, the tools that you have been the most useful things?
Yeah, there is. Yes, I have skin picking. I will always have skin picking, but I am not skin picking. It's something that is one fraction of me. And just thinking of it like that takes its dominance away from my entire being.
Yeah.
I try and talk to myself, if I find myself saying something harsh to myself, I try and remember that I need to talk to myself as if it was somebody I'd met. So I try and be more fair. I try and say things out loud to my husband, and say, I know this isn't true, but this is how my mind is interpreting this at the moment. And I don't know how to stop my mind telling me that. And just the act of saying it seems to help. But there are two activities that I do where I realize after I've done them that I haven't had that program running in the background. When I'm in my garden, weeding the garden or pruning or whatever I'm doing, digging, getting muddy, I do not think about my skin. I'm not doing that scanning. And I only realise when I come in and I get in the shower and I think, oh, that's 3 hours. Hasn't been happening. And it's kind of like I've had a weight lifted for that period of time. It's just like it's gone away. And the other thing I do is I have lots of jobs, but I'm a stained glass artist, and if I manage to get a day or a few hours in my studio where I am uninterrupted, I realise after I've been being creative that I haven't had that background program running in my head. And it is because become aware of it after the event, it's a really nice kind of like lifting of a weight. There has been this moment where it just hasn't been the dominant. It hasn't even been present. It's not been there. But I mean, it's back immediately. But it is a real lifting of a weight. So I've tried to find other things to do. One of the things is that my skin picking means that I like to scan my body and then I scratch at it. But I think a lot of it is about the sensation, the touch sensation, because I feel like I love touching things really lightly and the sensation through the ends of my fingertips. So what I try and do, and it doesn't always work now, is that I will gently rub my fingertips either together or run them on the fabric, or run little circles round and round. You get these lovely sensations through my fingertips. I'm trying to delay picking at something or going to investigate an area of my skin that this little insidious voice is telling me to do it by creating a distraction, even if it's just for 15, 20 seconds, because I feel like I am taking the control away from that insidious little voice that has dominated everything forever, even if it's only for 15 seconds. And I can congratulate, and then I make a mental point or a vocal point sometimes of acknowledging that I've managed to do that. Before, if I managed to do it, I would only make a mental point of noticing when I'd failed to do it or when I'd given in and done the negative. So I would admonish myself for the negative thing. Go, look, you've picked that scab, but I would never acknowledge the occasion where I didn't, or when I'd managed to do something else, or when I'd managed to distract. So now I try really hard to actively acknowledge those tiny positives.
Yeah, because they're actually not. It's not that tiny. That's the thing.
It's not. No, it's not. It's massive, because in the past I'd have gone, I'd perhaps been at a dinner party and have this urge that I just have to go. I cannot avoid my skin any longer, and my fiddling that I'm doing at the table that I'm pretending no one has noticed is not enough. And I would go and hide in a bathroom and disappear for 20 minutes because it was, and do all the scratching and picking and dabbing with tissues that I had to do. And I hate saying that. It's really bad. I won't ever listen to this back probably, because it's, I'll be mortified by that image of myself. But, and there are times, quite a lot of them sometimes, where I still do that. But there are also quite a lot of times where I don't do that, where and those are the ones I've chosen to focus on the times I don't do it, rather than on the time. And that sounds really easy, and it's not at all. I have chosen to be kinder to myself in the voice that I use with myself. I try and use the same voice on myself that I would use with other people, and I would never be as mean to other people as I am to myself.
What then would you say, as a final question, to someone who is, I don't know when you might think that your skin picking was at its worst, but if you can try and imagine a time where you thought, before you even knew what you were dealing with, I guess, and it was just something that you did and you felt you had no control, what would you say to someone who's in that position?
Yeah, I mean, I've had periods of time where I've picked so much that I have got infections in my skin, and then I've ended up on steroids or antibiotics and things because my skin can't heal, and that is shamefully embarrassing and scary, really scary, because you're thinking, you're thinking, oh my God, how am I ever going to get out of this cycle? I went on a reset course with this amazing woman who talks about managing your own time, and she's called Abigail Barnes. But there is a 3-word phrase that I use a lot: progress, not perfection. Okay, you haven't managed to stop yourself doing things all day, but perhaps you only scratched your left leg today. You didn't scratch, just kind of, it's just kind of forgive yourself. look for the tiny positives, which, because they're not tiny, don't belittle them. And, do not think that you are weird and extraordinary, but you are weird and extraordinary but so is everybody else. We're all weird, we're all extraordinary, we're all unique, we all have our concerns and foibles. There are so many more people than we think of that have these problems and live this life that looks like we've got it all together. People look at me. If you look at my social media, and anyone can, bernib.co.uk or Berni B anywhere, because it's all public. It looks like I have this super confident life that's all together, and I have a great life, but I also have this massive load of hang up and issues and everything else, and I think that if you look at anybody who looks like they've got it all together, in the background they probably haven't, and I think acknowledging that is really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Berni. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Incredibly candid and honest. I'm really grateful to you, and I'm sure that anyone who's experienced the same issue, or even who hasn't, will have just found it really fascinating and uplifting. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Claire. Thank you.
Wow, that was such a great insight into the pull of skin picking. I feel I've got a real sense of what it's like to live in a body that's constantly scanning. Thanks so much to Berni for her honesty and time. To hear more episodes, just search for Beating BDD on major podcast apps and Spotify. You can also leave us feedback by following the BDD Foundation on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. I'll be back with another interview soon. In the meantime, remember this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.